Hello and welcome to the shed. In today's video I'm going to show you how to eliminate these plain tracks that you see on this piece of wood here without using cambers. Hope you enjoy. First of all, we want to talk about what the plain tracks are so you have an understanding of what we're talking about. There's no camber to this blade. It is a dead straight blade with square edges here. Now these square corners, if the plane is cutting too deep, will actually leave a little ridge. So if we're planing and we're going a little too deep, you can see what's going to happen when I just push my hand in here. And it's gouged out and it's given us a square sort of edge on both sides. It's those pointed edges and their squareness to the edge of the blade that leaves what's called plain tracks. So to eliminate that, we obviously have to do something with that corner to stop it doing that. Now, one way is a camber, but I'm not going to show you cambers today. I'm going to show you an easier process that you don't have to do every time you sharpen. It's essentially just rolling the corner of the blade away. Now, what that's going to do is actually feather the edge cut of the blade, and that means it's not got that square point that we see here, and so it won't leave that sharp line because it's going to feather out, and because it's going to curve it away, it's going to come through and it's not going to leave that very square edge that we're accustomed to if we don't do anything. So I'm going to talk you through the process of how I do this. I'm going to be using the blade from my brand new Stanley Bailey here for this, and I've got another blade that I'm going to show you for a second way. And what I've done on this, I've reground the bevel on this so there is no rolled corners that I'd normally have on my everyday planes. Let's jump down here and I'll talk you through the process of how I do this freehand and also using a jig if you have one like this or a cheap one, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So one thing to bear in mind when doing this is that if you're going to use something like a soft stone like your water stones, you are going to gouge as you remove that corner on your stone. You are going to damage or gouge your stone, so you might have to flatten that. So I recommend using a harder stone, maybe a hard natural oil stone if you can get it, or just a man-made stone. Some of them are hard enough that you'd be able to do this and then maybe flatten it afterwards. Ideally a diamond stone, whether it's stones like I've got here or just a cheap stone. A very cheap stone will get you started. But those of you out there that are using a sandpaper method, you're not going to be able to use sandpaper to do this. So I wouldn't even try that, it's just going to tear it. So you could pick yourself up a cheap, inexpensive diamond stone just for that rough work. If you happen to have the Veritas jig with a cambered wheel, you can do it using that. Or if you've got one of the cheap ones that's got a single wheel, you can actually rock it and control it that way. So let's jump down here and I'll talk you through how we do it. So we can come in, and with this style you just rock it to the side and you can see it's lifting it 3 or 4 mil. It stays flatter doing this. So I do about 10 roll rubs on that side. Just had the blade move on me, so I'm just rechecking it again just so it doesn't happen again. And then you rock it to the other side. And then you'd move on to your finer stone. Because this is a new blade that I haven't really used before, you can actually see it's quite exacerbated on here for you to actually see where the polish is. Now, you could go more aggressive than that, make them a little steeper if you wanted to, and that means you would go longer between sharpenings, or if you don't sharpen much, these little not so aggressive ones, you can still get away with sharpening a few times before having to redo that. So the way I do this freehand, I'm going to come in on my sharpest grit, we're going to feel for that bevel, and then we're just going to lift it a little bit. Now, the idea is that you're still trying to keep it flat on here, but on the corner, and just lifted slightly, so you're cutting just on the corner. So you're just lifting it so you've only got contact of maybe 5 mil on this side. And you can keep that flat. Do the same here. Need a little bit more on this side. Now that I've done that, I like to just go up a little bit more and down, up, down. And all that's doing is just helping to roll that corner out. Then we move on to the next stone and just roll it through, keeping it on this flat. And then onto my finer. And so obviously I can refine that a little bit further, and you can see how this is curved away quite distinctively on this side. This side I didn't quite do enough, and that's some of the problems that you can run into doing this freehand. If you have to go back to add a little bit more, do it. So let's come back here. And on the back of your blade like this, you're looking for it to be uniform sort of curve. So now I can go back onto this one, smooth it out, polish it out. That's what I call rolling the corners. Now I can go ahead and I can sharpen on that straight a number of times before I have to come back and actually re-roll those corners. And if you make them less aggressive, you might have to do them more often, and that's why I like to do them like this. And you're just cutting in the central part, which is more contact with the blade than you generally have with a camber as well. So generally I would do this prior to sharpening, because you might damage and rough up the main part of the cutting blade. So then I would then come back in and flatten that central part where it's not curved, just to ensure that you have a nice clean, even cutting edge on the edge of your blade. So let's throw this back into the plane, and I'll show you that it doesn't leave any plane tracks now. So just before I throw this back in the plane, I wanted to show you the same demonstration we did at the start, and you can see as we come through, it feathers out. There's actually no square edges just out on the edge here, and I know that's not the easiest for you to see on here, but it's feathered out here. So you see how we've got this ridge? We no longer have that ridge when it's done here. So when it comes to putting the chip breaker on, some of you might say, well, is this curve going to affect the way the chip breaker comes on? And as you can see, if I was putting it to the outside edge of that, I've only got maybe 1.5 millimeters gap on that blade there, which is generally how close I put my chip breakers. Now we're going to come in here, and you can see this doesn't have a ridge, even though it looks like it might. It's curved off, so as my finger comes across, it doesn't catch. A good demonstration here is that if I run my knife here, it doesn't actually catch it. So you can see that it's actually not left a ridge, because the blade is just, as you can see, it's just scooting straight over the surface. And now the other advantage of rolling these is you don't get any little cambered curve on your blade doing it in this process. It stays all flat right through, because the contact is on the flat and it's just feathering out the edges. So you can see and we've got no ridging there anywhere. You can see the knife goes across and catches absolutely nothing. So there you have it, folks. That's how I roll the corners of my blades so that we don't get those plane tracks, and you can see that it works fairly well, and I find that it's a more simple process rather than having to do a camber every time I sharpen. I can roll those corners and sharpen 3, 4, 5, 6 times. It depends how aggressive you make that curve. Now that's up to you, because that can affect how close your chip breaker can get, as I was mentioning. So I like to keep it a little more on the conservative side. If it's like a day-to-day user that's just a general purpose, you can probably make it a little more aggressive and keep the chip breaker a little further back. But if you're working on very, very figured grain, I would suggest that maybe you very lightly curve those corners, or maybe not curve them at all, and just do a very, very fine cut. So if you like this video, please consider liking and subscribing down below. Really does help the channel out more than you know. And while you're down there, please sign off in the comments. Do you guys use rolling the corners, which I've seen Paul Sellers do, or do you guys use Cambers? Let me know how efficient you think each of them are, and whether it does slow your work down or not. And if you'd like to support me a little bit further, please consider checking me out on Patreon and Instagram. And if you liked this great little sharpening setup video, please check out the video up here where I show you how to actually set the chip breaker from the edge of the blade, and also the sharpening playlist right here. Bye for now.